Remember, India's Ministry of External Affairs had earlier accused the US Commission on International Religious Freedom, which is an American federal government entity, of interfering in India's electoral exercise by recommending in its annual report that India should be classified as a country of particular concern. The ministry said that the commission is making efforts to interfere in the largest electoral exercise of the world and that they will never succeed. In fact, the MEA spokesperson also spoke about the foreign influence, that bite which we played for you. So is the Lok Sabha election being influenced? What's the basis of India's fears and how can India safeguard itself during this crucial time? Let's understand this from my guest tonight on the show. I'm joined by advocate N.S. Napinai. She is a founder of Cyber Sathi. I'm also joined by Chirayu Thakkar. He's a foreign policy expert. Good evening and namaskar to both of you. Chirayu Thakkar, let me start with you. What do you make of these claims by Russia that the US might be interfering in India's general elections?
Shreya, good evening, and thank you for having me. I think there are two or three levels at which this entire issue needs to be understood. First of all, some of the actors, for example, the US CIRF, we know who the actors are behind the organization and what role they are playing, and they have a certain ideology. In many cases, they have certain strong links to ISI, and from time to time, they use this platform to embarrass India. That is very well known, very well documented, and that is not something that I'm saying new on your show. The second aspect is what Russia has come to increasingly realize. Russia, for example, is not liking our proximity to the United States, and it has increasingly come to realize that India has certain sensibilities towards the Khalistan issue. And the West collectively, mostly the Anglosphere country, which includes the US, but also the UK, Australia, etc., where there is a considerable Sikh diaspora, not only those who have emigrated recently, but second and third generation diaspora between their desire to have a separate homeland in Punjab and India's anti-secessionist stance, there is something which is not, there is a misalignment. And both this set of democracies, the West and India, despite their current proximity, they are not able to resolve this issue among themselves. And it is further trying to wedge uh, uh, strengthen the wedge, but these are mature set of democracies, and they are most probably will work in a way that this doesn't
Hmm.
become a major issue, and there some give and take would be required on both sides. But on the specific issue of election,
Okay.
if somebody sitting in US CIRF or any other agency who is putting out this report and they are thinking that an average Indian voter would be influenced by this, I'm sorry, they have no understanding how Indian voter works, because Indian voter has so many concerns: caste, economic issues, regional loyalties, so on and so forth. And sitting in Washington DC writing a 10-page swanky
Sure.
report is not going to influence an average Indian voter. So I think there is some geopolitics there, there is
Okay.
some misunderstanding, and there are some bad actors, or at least actors motivated by ill will.
Hmm. Okay, let me take this to N.S. Napinai now. N.S. Napinai, we keep talking about how elections can be interfered with, not just in India, but across the world. But what happens really? Cyberspace is something that we have been seeing is a potential space where bad elements can come and actually interfere with elections. They can set a certain narrative. They can use influence online to impact voters on the ground. How does this really work in the cyberspace?
Well, the cyberspace just gave us a broader spectrum or a platform to work from. But then the issue about foreign interference is not something new. So when we talk about it in the context of cyber, you just have these alternatives in terms of a reach, which is much wider. And as the earlier
Hmm.
speaker also mentioned, the issue really here will be about who is that reach out to? What kind of a voter is that to? But let
Hmm.
me just limit my response to the legalities of it here. The first and foremost is with elections ongoing, there is a clear code of conduct which also is adapted by social media platforms, which clearly set out what are the do's and don'ts in the process of the election process. And one aspect of it is also for rooting out fake
Sure.
news and misinformation. So the issue will then become whether something that's
Hmm.
being promoted is indeed fake news or misinformation. So, when you talk about the aspect of influencing, interestingly, some jurisdictions have actually come out with laws which are specific to restricting or limiting or regulating foreign influence. Canada is one of them. United Kingdom, which is one of the top listed countries in terms of the democracy index, has come out with a foreign influence law which limits it. So maybe now India is at a cusp where we should also be considering a foreign influence law, or I would put it more clearly as an anti foreign influence law.
All right. Chirayu Thakkar, considering the fact that Russia and United States are at loggerheads, considering the geopolitical situations of the times, uh, could it be that Russia is also trying to create that wedge between India and the United States?
Yes, that is very much what it seems on the surface of it, because this is the first time Russia has taken a plunge into this issue. It has never commented on US India ties. Largely, it has stayed away, especially on bilateral issues. It has stayed away from it. It is unfortunately the United States who has time and again said that India should not buy Russian oil, or India should not take sides, or India should, call out Russian aggression, so on and so forth. So, in all these instances, I think Russia has largely remained silent because Russia knows how to talk behind the scenes instead of talking from the front. But this on this particular issue, Russia wants not only signal to the government, which it can always do behind the scenes, but when it makes a public statement, it is trying to escalate this issue in the minds of ordinary Indians, especially the informed publics who follow all these major comments and who perhaps invest a little bit time in what is happening geopolitically. What Russia is trying to signal and say to them is that, look, there is, on the one hand, there is United States who keep hectoring you on moral values, religious freedom, human rights, etc., so on and so forth, and you are always being lectured. On the other hand, we are the one who understands your sensibilities regarding Khalistan. We would never support this issue, and on this specific issue, by making this provocative comments, in fact, they have drawn attention of the media, of the informed publics towards their position, and that's the reason perhaps we are discussing this.
Hmm. But Chirayu Thakkar, do you also feel, the fact that the Prime Minister also hinted at foreign influence, foreign powers influencing general elections, was he hinting at one of the powers being the US?
Uh, I think what the PM was generally hinting is that there is a money that is getting funneled. We have previous reports that Chinese money was getting funneled into some of the media organizations. There are other people who are committed to liberal ideology who has been funding some of the non-government organizations, and that because they do not like conservative governments around the world, they take a certain position and they try to support people who are already creating domestic resistance. So my understanding is that PM were perhaps talking about such people. And these people also are, of course, aligned to some of the ruling dispensations in major Anglosphere countries. So that was my analysis, that that is what the PM is saying. But that is, of course, for the PM to justify what he had on his mind.
Hmm. Sure. NS Napinai, here we're talking about the United States, but we all know that threats like China, our neighboring China, also remain one of the big concerns in the cyberspace. You've told us about the legal perspective in this matter. But is India cyber resilient to save its democracy? Do we have the required laws, the required setup, the required cyber infrastructure that is needed to save democracy?
I should hope so, because I personally feel that, often we are confused with mixing up what laws are available with what we need without realizing the scope of the existing laws. So, this is all I would have to say. The first and foremost is existing laws as it were sufficient, but you now have a couple of additions to existing laws through rules. The intermediary guidelines of 2021 is a classic example. You have two developments under that. One is for rooting out misinformation and fake news. which was introduced, and also an addition, add-on to that aspect was included. Now you also have the fact-checking notification that has come out. So these are all methodologies which you can use in terms of countering fake news or hate speech. But then the issue really here, Shreya, is when this kind of information or news comes out in the heels of elections and midway through elections, then what is it that we are looking at? Are we really, that's why I qualified my earlier statement also by saying, are we talking about misinformation here, or are we talking about influencing as opposed to just opining, right? So when we're talking about influencing and how they expect the polity to react, I would really like to quote, I would paraphrase Oscar Wilde rather, and this has always been one of my favorite lines in terms of a person having courage in other people's convictions. So, are we going to have courage in other people's convictions, or do we have our own? And would we know what is best for us, or are we going to let others influence us? This would be my word of caution to every voter out there. Be cautious, balance out your views. Remember, one people's opinion may not necessarily be that of others, and an opinion does not have to be a fact.
Sure, absolutely. Quickly, briefly, before I wrap it up, Chirayu Thakkar, let me just understand from you then, do you think, this wider problem of countries influencing each other's elections can sort of, grow further, or there is something that governments across the world can do to actually sort of reduce it or stop it completely? Is that possible at all?
Uh, Shreya, for now, given this globalization of ideas and there is free communication, free movement of ideas, goods, everything, I think in this interconnected world, it is very difficult to not think about what is happening around the world and not getting influenced by it. There are some of the campuses right now in New Delhi, they are talking about Palestine and Gaza and asking their universities to divest themselves from Tel Aviv University.
Yes.
So I think there is no one, I think, particularly influencing them. But if this is happening organically, somebody using similar ideologies on the both sides of the divide and trying to influence, I don't see that entirely implausible. It is for the voters, as the other panelist was saying, to remain vigilant and form their own opinions, make an informed choice. That is the only thing we can hope in our democracy.
Absolutely. All right. We'll leave it there. Chirayu Thakkar and NS Napinai, thank you very much for joining us on Nation Tonight and sharing your perspective. Of course, as voters who are voting in this year's Lok Sabha elections, we all have to be aware of the choices we make this year. Thank you very much to both of you. All right, let's move on and get you other updates now. Days after